This one was trying to protect a bunch of things, a bunch of rights for people at the state level. And what it did is that we had aspects of due process in the Fifth Amendment for the national level. This one comes back and says, no, states, you got to do this stuff too. But it does a little bit more. Listen to the stuff that it does. What we call the incorporation doctrine, which I'm getting to when I talk about civil liberties. There's this thing called due process clause. You've probably heard this term before. If you're like me, you can hear it in your eyes if you're not quite sure what it is. What this does is it prohibits the state from depriving anybody of life, liberty, or property without due process. Okay? Blah, blah, blah. What's that mean? Due process basically means going through a legal system, going through courts, going through a set way to do this, which in our system means going through the legal system, having you arrested, putting you on trial, convicting you. That's due process. So in other words, they can't kill you. They can't deprive you. They can't deprive you of your stuff, your property, without going through the legal system. So we just can't kill you for no reason. We just like shoot you in the head. We just can't do that. You go, oh, the king says that. Or the president says that. We can't take away your stuff, like cut your house down on, without filing paperwork in court. And we can't put you in jail. We can't throw you in jail. So that's due process clause. I'll come back to more of that for the equal protection clause. This is equal protection for all citizens. It doesn't say equal protection for black people, it doesn't say equal protection for white people, and then or green people. It just says equal protection for all citizens. So, what this means, and this is where, at this time it meant former slaves, but nowadays it encompasses everybody. And this is where when we see a lot of court cases, we see a lot of cases filed in the equal protection clause. Because what this thing says in the Constitution is you have to be equal. You can't treat this group differently than that group. If you've got a law, it should apply to everybody equally. So you can kind of see where it's in our lawsuits on that. So, equal protection laws. This one is then used to protect the rights of racial minorities, women, other minorities by the state and local governments. Because the 14th binds to the states, this says that the states have got to treat people equally in the laws too. When they wrote this, what they were trying to avoid was laws, because what happened right after the Civil War, and I'll talk about this in Civil War as well, right after the Civil War, they passed what's called black codes, where they said, okay, so you free the slaves, big law. You free the slaves, we're going to pass what's called a black code, which means white people get to vote. Black people no vote. That's black code. Then what happens when they went through and they passed the 15th and the 14th Amendment, they came back and tried to explicitly say you can't do that. You can't pass laws. So you have to treat everybody equal under the law. Now, that's where the civil liberties are going to get into Jim Crow. Because Jim Crow treats everybody equal under the law. But what it does is it puts qualifiers on it. Say everybody technically, Jim Crow law gave everybody technically the ability to vote. But in order to vote, you have to pay tax if you're a racial minority, or your grandfather had to be eligible to vote, or you had to pass a literacy class. They put all these qualifiers on it. They couldn't take away your right to vote. Black codes took away the right to vote. Jim Crow doesn't take away your right to vote, but what it does is it sets a barrier so high that makes it practically impossible for you to vote. But they put Jim Crow in place. So, there's another thing that's in Section 514. That's where you can say called remedial legislation. And that comes out of Section 5 of the 14th Amendment. And what that says is that if there's, I don't know why it's superscript there, it's just either that, and I can't fix it because I'm stupid. But if there's a discriminatory state law, black people pass national laws to address that. That's what we need that means. Is they can remediate that, try to fix that. If you've got a state law that's discriminatory, national law, we can pass national law to do those. That's that. So, federal. My birthday is, well, I was born about that day. It sounds cool when you're fine. If I get a strawberry cake, I can get it this last time. Heart-shaped strawberry cake. Anyway, I'm just complaining. Like, a big cake. Why make some cakes here? I'm going to talk about two major types of federalism. Actually, I'm going to talk about more than that. I'm going to talk about four. But one thing I'm going to talk about is almost every book that you run across in American politics is going to talk about these two cases. We're going to talk about this one and this one. However, there's some more models, and there's like thin federalism we're going to talk about, which would be good for you to know. And there's some other stuff. But in competitive federalism, but I'm going to address these. Almost every book we're going to talk about these. We'll play with it. What's dual federalism versus quasi-federalism? Dual federalism is what we operated under until the New Deal in the 1930s. So from founding to New Deal, 1932-ish, we operate under this model. This is the model where you get the Dred Scott decision, and that's going to make more sense. Where you see the Dred Scott decision, where you have Dred Scott who's a slave, and then he goes for free territory, and then he says, and then he moves back and says, but I'm a free